If you can, go ahead and turn to Matthew 21. And this morning, hopefully, we're going to go through two parables. There are three back to back right here, but we'll try to go through two of them for sure. Matthew 21 is a whole section dealing with Jesus' authority being questioned. And it's also been, if you read, it's also noticeable that these parables are very direct. Whereas normally the parables kind of seem to have more of a backdoor flavor to them, kind of, like you think about this for yourself, which one are you? And these are very direct. He's going to even give the commentary on these things. And so we're going to look at them together today. Matthew 21, verses 28 through 32 is the first one. It's called the parable of the two sons. And so the Bible reads, but what do you think? A man had two sons. He came to the first and said, son, go work today in my vineyard. He answered and he said, I will not. But afterward he regretted it and he went. And then he came to the second son and he said likewise. And he answered and said, I will go, sir. But he did not go. Which of the two did the will of the Father? They said to him, the first. And so Jesus said to them, assuredly I say to you that the Teslas and the harlots into the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But tax collectors and harlots believed him, and you saw it, and you did not afterward relent and believe him. Now, of course, you see two sons. It's interesting here that Matthew 21, verse number 28 through 31, is that the actual Greek word there, instead of sons, is the word teknon, and that means children. And so it's not an actual masculine term there. And I think if you look at the rest of the commentary that Christ gives us, he goes to the tax collectors, which would be men, and the harlots, which would be women. And so he's going to elaborate that, I think, by using the word children. I think for whatever reason, the translators use the word sons, just to probably get more of the audience interested, I think. But it's just one of those things. When you look at this, of course, the first one, what was his issue? He said that he's going to go, and what happened? Well, the Father asked him, will you go? And what did he say? He said no, but then what happened? Yeah, he changed his mind. The Father saying go work seems to be a test of sincerity. And who's going and asking? Well, it'll be the Father, isn't it? So he's asking him, as my son, how sincere are you with carrying on in the work? And of course, he said no at the beginning. And then it says he repented. Now, when you look at verse 29 and 30, and how it says no, I found this thing from Dale Carnegie in his book about how to win friends and influence people, about the word no. And I was going to share it with you just for a brief moment. A no response, according to Professor Overstreet, is a most difficult handicap to overcome. When you have said no, all your pride of personality demands that you remain consistent with yourself. You may later feel that the no was ill-advised. Nevertheless, there is your precious pride to consider. I think that matches up with this guy pretty good. Perhaps he got pride in the way, and perhaps but by repenting, it shows that he possessed in humility. He said no, and we all know it's hard to get over a no, but yet he saw the light, didn't he? He saw the way to get out of this thing. And so in turn, of course, when he was asked which one of these two did the will of the Father, the answer is, of course, the first one. Now, the will of the Father in the Gospel of Matthew is mentioned three other times. The first two times is found in Matthew 7, verse 12 through 13 there. And then let me get my notes here. And then the second time is Matthew 18, verse 17. I get my notes. I think give you the wrong verses. Anyway, we'll figure it out as we go. But as we look at this, either way, Matthew 12:50 is where it is. But either way you look at it, when you look at this will of the Father business, of course, the Gospel of Matthew is emphasizing Jesus as the Messiah, as the beloved Son. Twice in his Gospel does he reiterate this. Matthew 3, when Christ was baptized, the Father shone down, the voice came down from heaven and says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." And Matthew 17, verse 5, on the Mount of Transfiguration, the Father again shows, "This is his Son, whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him." That was all according to the prophetic utterance of Moses back from Deuteronomy 18, verse 15 to 17 there. But when you look at this, then Christ is all about doing the will of the Father. And so that's a sign, again, of sincerity, a sign of humility, a sign of obedience. And this first one did not understand that sign until later. And we know that the first one represents what group according to this, according to Christ's own words? Who's the first group that he's trying to represent here? Okay, the Gentiles. And in particular, he's talking about the publicans and the harlots. Now, of course, I think it does represent the Gentiles as a whole. But it's interesting here that he's going to use two of the most dirtiest of people to represent ones who are above the pious, righteous, or self-righteous Pharisees. And so that's why this one's very, very direct. You know, this one's very direct, and that's why he even makes sure that they don't miss it. Because parables, and you read Matthew 13, were intended to really be kind of a self-judging exercise. It was to see if you were going to indict yourself on charges or not. He has gone into Jerusalem, which is at the beginning of this chapter. He has now taken away the veil of the exercise. Now he's being very, very direct. And so he's trying to get down to the very heart of the matter. And so, of course, they are trying to figure out which way they go. But notice this in verse number 32, that he mentions also John came to you in the way of righteousness. Now, Matthew 22, verse 16 calls this the way of God. And you did not believe him. So it's interesting here that the assertion takes up the language in verse 25 and so confirms the allegorical identification that the second son represents the chief priests and the elders. Now, there are a few different ideas on who these guys are. And, of course, we've already had a few mentioned here. Some would say that the ones who do the will, who do not do, who say I will and will not do, represent the ruling priest. And the son who says I will not, yet afterward he regretted and he went, represents those who did believe John's preaching, verse 32. And the chief priest did not even feel remorse afterward. And some have suggested this is dealing with after John's death. Of course, the other side of the aisle is this. Two sons could have been, some have said, could have been Pharisees. One who may have believed. You see that in John 7, verse number 48. And also there could have been others who were more self-righteous, who did not believe. And so that's one idea. Go ahead.
How he talked to his disciples. He gave them a real concrete question. there too where he used the tax collectors and the prostitutes. In other words, people that would normally not attuned to believe or even comprehending what they were talking about.
Right.
But they was able to be persuaded.
Right.
And then the last part, but even after you had seen that, you didn't change your mind and believe him. And see, when you back up to verse 29, okay, that's a good example where that's on, okay, that's on when he first, his father first approached him. He was sincere enough to just say, I don't want to do it. You know, he was honest, I don't want to do it. And then later on, he changed his mind. So that's the way Jesus started that. He gave him, and he said, well, wait a minute, he changed his mind. And the other son, what he did, he lied to himself and to his dad too, because he said, I'm going to do it, and then he would go. Knowing the consequences.
Right.
You see, that's what we have to understand. We need to understand about that word too. It's always consequences to your decision. That's what you start with.
Yes. Right.
It's consequences that you go face. It's not that you go see. It's consequences you go face by the decision you make, regardless of what you do, what is brought to your attention.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
So.
And that's a good comment because one of the headings for this section is pretend obedience versus delayed obedience, which I think would kind of summarize what you're saying pretty well too. And also, what's the side of the verses? What you got?
You can see that the verse talk about that the two words repent. The word repent here is different than what I see in Acts 13. It's like he didn't have to change his mind. He just felt regret.
Right. Right. Well, you.
And
That's good.
Yeah. He covered everything when he talked to him, like in verse 31. He asked him the question, which of the two sons did what the father wanted?
Right. The first one.
Okay.
Yeah.
In spite of what all went on, that son, he changed his mind and did what the father wanted. In spite of the fact that at first he didn't even want to do it. And told him, I don't want to do this.
Hmm? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And yeah. And so, one of the things here I think that is interesting is that the first group, which would be the tax collectors and the harlots, prostitutes, had no pretense to religion. They were not predisposed. Well, they may have been, but we would suggest probably not to religion, especially to Christianity. And yet here they are. They're very readily going to go ahead. And yet you have something I've said the Bible all day. Man, that's what Christ said in John 5:29, that the scriptures testify of me. And yet, what happened? Why'd you miss it? And so, they should have figured it out. But they were definitely not. Yeah.
About that, like he said, tax collection and prostitute. A lot of people that really seem to not struggle after they convert, ones who've been through a lot of struggling, and then they come to Christ because they seem to have more of gratitude of the change.
Sure. Yeah. I think, and I think, I agree with that because I feel like, me and you were raised in the church. I feel like, we have a different kind of appreciation than someone who really converted to Christ outside of that bubble that we got to enjoy. I know several of you in here will fit that one very well, and you have a different appreciation to play, and you would probably get frustrated with us who grew up inside the kind of urgency as you do. But I think it's just kind of one of those games you play, unfortunately, with this. But yeah, I think yeah.
That's what we like about the church. When he called it the manifold wisdom of God. You know, Horace explained it as manifold on the engine. There's an intake manifold and an exhaust manifold. So you get it coming and you get it going.
Okay. I've never heard that with the word manifold, which means multicolored. So that verse, that's Ephesians 3, verse number 10 there. But I like it. That's good.
Manifold does what
Yeah.
it said from the perspective of how he explained it.
Yeah, the exhaust. Yeah,
Press
it's funny.
fire to keep it from being seen.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, see, I would never have gone there. I'm not that kind of a person. I just don't do that stuff. That's good though. I like it. That's funny. That's good. That's a good way to look at it. I don't have that kind of wisdom, I guess. But all right. Very good. Yeah, good comment. Now I do want to make a comment about this because we mentioned this about the Gentiles being a synonym through the harlots and tax collector. You see it in Matthew 9, verse 10, 11, and Matthew 11, verse 19, as well as Matthew 5, verse 46 to 47, and Matthew 18, verse 17. That was a synonym that they always would use. Would be these groups represent the Gentiles. So you mentioned that a minute ago. All right. Yeah, good stuff. All right. So when you look at, obviously 32 is also describing the commentary on what was happening here. And of course, they should have known better because John was already there preaching as the one who was going to present the way of righteousness. He's going to be there to present as the forerunner of Jesus. And yet we know that they were there. Matthew 3, John identifies them and says, "You brood of vipers." And so, he identifies them that they're there, and yet they still refuse to acknowledge Jesus, and they still refuse to acknowledge the testimony of the last prophet, John, before Christ. And so I think right here he's trying to emphasize to a degree the authority that John also had, which is a talking point throughout a lot of this. And that's what he mentioned. And that's actually what was going on here in Matthew 21 a little bit about what authority do I have. And they were talking about John, Matthew 21, 23 through 26 there. And so the whole thing is trying to make them realize that, John was important. But who's more important? Well, the more important one there would be Jesus, we know, but John also had great importance. And so they're trying to figure out who this guy was. And was he legitimate or not? And so Christ is given the parable in response to the authority that Christ has, as well as the authority that John the Baptist had. Okay, so, and then another parable. Now, the second one, this is a bigger one, trying to get here. Before we read this one, I want to look at another passage of Scripture. Can somebody read Isaiah 5, verses 1 through 7? Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 7. So can somebody read that for us? And then as we're reading it, keep it in mind, and then we're going to read this parable and see if you see any kind of similarities there. Okay? Can somebody read for us Isaiah 5, verses 1 through 7?
Now let me sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. He dug it up and cleared out its stones, and planted it with the choicest vine. He built a tower in its midst, and also made a winepress in it. So he expected it to bring forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, please, between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why then, when I expected it to bring forth good grapes, did it bring forth wild grapes? And now, please let me tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away its head, and it shall be burned, and break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will lay it waste. I shall not be pruned, or it shall not be pruned or dug, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain on it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant plant. He looked for justice, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry for help.
All right. Thank you very much. Now, I'll read this one. Here another parable, Matthew 21:33. There was a certain landowner who planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a tower. And he leased it to vine dressers and went into a far country. Now, when the vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vine dressers that they might receive its fruit. And the vine dressers took his servants, beat one, killed one, and stoned another. And again he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did likewise to them. Then last of all he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But when the vine dressers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, and let us kill and seize his inheritance. So they took him and cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine dressers? They said to him, he will destroy those wicked men miserably and lease his vineyard to other vine dressers who will render to him the fruits of their seasons. Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone? This is the Lord's doing, this was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of heaven, or God rather, will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing the fruits of it. And whoever falls on this stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. Now when the chief priests and Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was talking about them. And so when they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the crowd because they took him for a prophet. Now, when you look at the comparisons here between Matthew 21, verses 33 through, I think it's 39, wasn't it? 40, and Isaiah 5, 1 through 7, what are some of the initial things that pop into your mind that are similar between the two?
The vineyard, for one.
Vineyard, number one. All right. What else you got? The hedge? Yeah. All right. What else do you see?
Bearing of its fruit.
Yeah, bearing goat's fruit. Right. Right.
Disappointment of the owner of the vineyard,
Yeah.
that he didn't get what he was hoping to get.
Right. Right. Owner's disappointment that he didn't get what he wanted to get. What you got?
The first one, he wanted to demolish the area, right?
Yeah,
And then here, the other set of people wanted to demolish the people. If that makes sense.
Yeah. A demolishing of area and people. Okay. What else you see? Yeah, you wanted good, but it got wild grapes instead. All right. Was there anything about stones in Isaiah 5? Stones? Yeah. All right. Also, we have the vineyard. Now, it's interesting here that apparently, let me look at this. Okay. Yep. Sorry, I had to read Greek. I forgot to translate that. Anyway, when you look at this, and it's interesting because there's been a suggestion made by a man named E.E. Ellis, not Fred's fellow man, of course. I think this guy's British, and he's dead 100 years ago. But anyway, but he made the observation that according to the custom of the day, what they would do when it comes to a synagogue sermon, okay, that what would happen is they would illustrate first with a story, then they would underscore this with words of commentary followed by a further biblical passage, which is how this ends. And so it's interesting here that Christ, if that is the case, is using their own typical method of teaching to show them that he is the chief cornerstone. He is the one that was being prophesied about and all these other kind of things that they were just missing. And so he's going to use their own language to justify himself. Now, when you look at Matthew 21, verse 33, and you go on down, of course, we see that the first ones who came through that were sent to the vineyard were, the servants. They beat one, killed one, stole another. And, to me, that sounds pretty violent. And it's interesting here is that when you look at verse number 38 rather, where they said this is the heir, it would seem to be that they perhaps thought if we kill everybody, then we can obtain this vineyard for ourselves. And so maybe if we take out everybody, we'll get the whole benefit of this thing. What you got?
When you look at what you read in the Old Testament, we hear, in the Old Testament, God dealing with the children of Israel, but he would, concerning that. Here, this landowner was dealing with people he had leased that land to produce the crop that he could produce, and they was the one responsible. And he just sent these other people to collect, and they did what they did.
Hmm?
Still, and then he said his son. See, the thing was, they showed him that they had no respect, let alone for his authority, but even his gratitude for letting them lease the land. So see, that's a good example there. Really gives us a good understanding of how that this salvation thing works. Because okay, as it says in verse 20, now when the land will come, what will he do to those understand how that eternal final judgment is going to be. So that's the question we should ask ourselves concerning what Jesus is trying to just get them to see. Now, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? Because see, he's not going to be happy. He's not going to have a good temperament because he's dealt with, you know, he sent them. He see they are disobedient.
Right.
They killed everybody. He sent even his son.
Right. Right.
So the judgment from where we proceed, it's not going to be a good judgment.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Yeah. What you got, Ted? You have anything? Okay. It's interesting here that to me, there are some similarities here in the kingdom establishment. Now, I think this is dealing with the church coming in, and they don't understand what that really looks like because they've already, as a Jewish people, they've already misunderstood the kingdom to begin with. And I'm saying this is dealing even with the very first kingdom with Saul and David and Solomon. They didn't understand that at all. It's interesting there that even when they were trying to not make God their king any longer, back in the Old Testament, that the prophets were ones who were going against the kingdom from the very beginning. And so at the very beginning with Saul, David, and Solomon, they always had the prophets who were speaking against that kingdom. You should know better. And inside of the prayer of Hannah in 1 Samuel 2, verse number 10, she has kind of a prophecy of sorts here, where it says that the adversaries of the Lord shall be broken into pieces. From heaven he will thunder against them, and the Lord will judge the ends of the earth. Now that's a prophecy, I think, looking forward to the coming of Jesus. And you see the anointed in verse number 11 of 1 Samuel 2. And what's interesting here is that all the way through the Old Testament, the kingdom of Israel always had, it seemed to be, a prophet who would rise against it at some point in time. You know, David had Nathan come to him about the sin with Bathsheba. Saul had all kind of stuff happen with him when he was going down his paths of wickedness. Solomon was forsaking the laws of David and Saul, and he broke up the kingdom by paganism. And then obviously you didn't have those wicked areas and kings and kingdoms breaking to pieces and stuff. And it's interesting there that the entire time the prophets were against it. They were always against it. And every time they would be against it, they would be imprisoned, or they were put in or they would be stoned or beheaded or killed, or however would happen, that they would be tormenting themselves. And yet now this kingdom, the church, instead of a prophet being against it, now you have, in this case, John, mentioned a minute ago, the last and the greatest prophet is speaking on behalf of it. And then Christ himself, we call him, prophet, priest, and king. And so now you have a kingdom set up that is in full allegiance with God, whereas the first one failed. And so this is meant to be, and we know it is, it was always intended to be a spiritual kingdom. That was always in the plan, even from back in the Old Testament. It was always meant to be a spiritual kingdom. Daniel 2:44, Isaiah 2:1 and 2, other sections. And so right here, I think he's trying to elaborate that they thought, as the old law people did, that if I take over this kingdom for myself, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to make sure that God's no longer king. But when you look at what happened with them, they were warned about it. And they say, if you do this, in 1 Samuel 7, he says, and 8, that, you're going to lose your kids to war. You're going to have to go out there and start doing extra chores and tasks. Taxation is going to happen now. All this kind of things is just going to erupt on you, and you're not ready for it because God should be your king. And in fact, when you look at the very essence of the first kingdom, and this is, I'm using that phrase dealing with the Old Testament kingdom, Israel, is they were always supposed to help out the weak and the oppressed. That was the initial reason that God allowed to happen, was that they were going to help out the needy, the oppressed, the stranger, the alien, and they refused to do it. Now, our kingdom, one that you and I are in, our primary role is to do that. Help out the weak, the oppressed, the ones who are in sin. And so now we're going to, in a sense, be a part of that redemptive process, even today, of fixing what they did wrong. And we're going to show the world how God's people ought to behave, and how God's king is ruling, and how God's king, Jesus, is on his throne, and you can't remove him in spite of trying to make God no longer their king. Yet we proudly and thankfully assert that he is our king. And so when you look at this section right here, there's an interesting little phrase. If you were to read this inside of Hebrew or Aramaic here, that the words son and stone are a play on of words. Inside of the Hebrew, the word son is the word ben, and the word stone is the word eben or eben. And so he's going to try to show it. Now, when it comes to this stone, the stone represents certainty, and it represents absoluteness. And so when you see in Matthew 21 about this is the stone that you're trying to reject. You're trying to reject God's certainties. You're trying to reject God's promises. You're trying, and by doing so, you are rejecting, in fact, the heir. But as was mentioned already, who's going to take care of his kingdom? Well, in this case, and you look at verse number 60, who's going to take care of the church at the very end of the day? It's going to be who? The owner. Verse 40, the owner is going to take care of his church. The owner is going to take care of the kingdom, wasn't it? And that's Revelation chapters 2 and 3 there, about those churches of Asia, Christ going to them. But they're going to try to make sure that you can't do anything at all against the authority of Christ. Christ will take care of us. The owner will take care of his vineyard as Christ to take care of his church. And so therefore we strive to do all that we can to obviously be faithful members of that, in this case, the vineyard or the church. And then you look at, verse 41, of course, it says that he will destroy the wicked men most miserably. The word wicked there is the word evil. The idea of anyone being absolute evil, that man will be destroyed miserably. That man's existence will end in a miserable state. I think that will be because he's outside of God. He's away from repenting, and then he will lease his vineyard to others, vine just as they render him free of their seasons. So, and then that's why he brings up this verse here in verse number 42, which is actually Psalm 118, verse 22. And Psalm 118 is all dealing with God's promises. It's dealing with God's assurances. And that's Psalm 118 in a nutshell. And so part of that, though, is that there is going to be this chief cornerstone. It's going to be this stone that's going to be unmovable, is the whole intention. Now, when you look at this as well, let me move over here. My time is running short on me. I had a lot of stuff. That when you look at what's happening here, of course, they are trying to figure out, what that means. And so he's going to say that this chief cornerstone will actually be the stone that will grind him into powder. You see that in verse 42? Verse 44, rather. And so he's trying to elaborate for them that the kingdom of God is meant to be unmovable in spite of you trying to take advantage of it like you did the first time. You can't do it this time. That's beyond your reach. Don't even try it. And so this whole section is trying to me, elaborate really the unshakable nature of the church. Okay. Any other comments about that? What you got?
I want to go back to Israel's rejection of God as king.
Go ahead.
Samuel was brokenhearted. He was hurt. He was disappointed and angry because Israel wanted a king. He was so downtrodden that God told him, Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me.
Right.
And so, if we use all that you said, okay, and we consider what the people want, that's how we ended up with so many denominations, so many independent from the Church of Christ that Christ established. So the world today, the religious world has done what the Jews did then. They rejected God's word, and the religious world today has rejected God's word because they do not intend to follow it.
True.
And then you have individuals who grow these great kingdoms, and they take in billions of dollars, and they use that money in terrible, terrible ways.
Sure.
And they've turned, like Jesus drove the money changers out of the temple, they've turned God's house into the den of thieves.
Yeah.
The den of thieves.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. And I think that right here, he's condemning all that. You try to take advantage of it for yourself, and you totally just, you missed it. You've lost the whole plot of the whole matter. You have really forgotten what you're looking for. Yeah. 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 All right. We're going to stop there. So next week, let me double check this. We'll go into the wedding feast parable here. And the next in Matthew 22, verses 2 through 14. And so I hope you can be back for that. But we'll have worship here in a few minutes. Thank you very much.